In the vast ocean of the Buddha's teachings, a single sentence stands out like a timeless lighthouse guiding us through the stormy seas of human confusion and suffering. Manopubbaṅgamā dhammā, mind precedes all phenomena. These are the very first words of the Dhammapada, the most beloved text of the Theravada tradition. The Buddha, in his profound simplicity, did not begin his teachings with a grand metaphysical theory, nor with a demand for faith. He began with the mind, because it is here, in this fleeting, ever-moving, yet entirely intimate space called mind, that all things begin. What does it mean to say the mind comes first? It means that every word we speak, every action we take, every life we shape, our own and others, is born from a movement within the mind. Before we act, we intend. Before we speak, we think. Even before we think, subtle emotional tones, judgments, and conditioned impressions swirl beneath the surface. These mental stirrings shape how we interpret the world, how we see ourselves, and what kind of reality we participate in co-creating. Therefore, to understand life, to understand suffering and liberation, to understand karma and its unfolding consequences, we must begin not with gods or heavens or philosophies. We must begin with the mind. This teaching is not merely psychological, it is deeply spiritual. The Buddha was not giving a lecture on brain science or behavioral theory. He was inviting human beings to turn inward and recognize the sacred role of their own consciousness. In a world that constantly pulls our attention outward, toward external success, identity, reputation, pleasure, and power, the Buddha gently calls us back. Come see. Come look within. For the root of all you seek is not out there, it is in your own mind. This may sound simple, even obvious, but to live this truth is revolutionary. Most people live as if the world causes their joy and their pain. If someone is kind, we are happy. If something goes wrong, we suffer. We believe events, circumstances, and other people create our reality. The Buddha, however, saw through this illusion. He realized that suffering does not come from what happens, but from how the mind relates to what happens. A harsh word can pass through one person like a breeze, and yet pierce another like a spear. Why? Because the mind is what gives meaning. The mind is what grasps or lets go. The mind is what clings to the past, imagines a future, judges, resists, or accepts. In every moment, it is not the event, but the mind's response that creates peace or torment. This insight is the doorway to freedom. If we believe the source of our suffering lies outside us, we remain helpless. But if we understand that the root is within, then transformation is possible, not through blame, not through guilt, but through mindful awareness and gentle, consistent training of the heart. The Buddha said, "Whatever one frequently thinks and ponders upon, that will become the inclination of the mind." This is both a warning and a promise. If we nourish anger, greed, fear, and delusion, they will grow strong. If we nourish clarity, kindness, patience, and wisdom, these two will become our natural way of being. The mind is like a field. Whatever you plant, with care or neglect, will eventually bear fruit. Consider a person consumed by jealousy. Every time another success arises, their mind tightens, contracts, resists. That single moment of envy may seem small, but repeated again and again, it becomes a mental habit, a lens through which all experience is filtered. Now, no success of another brings joy. Only comparison, only lack, only pain. And yet, the same person could train the mind to rejoice in others' well-being, to cultivate mudita, sympathetic joy. In doing so, the same external event produces peace, connection, and a widening of the heart. What changed? Not the world, the mind. This is why in the Buddhist path, mind training is everything. The Eightfold Path, the four foundations of mindfulness, the cultivation of the Brahmaviharas, the practice of meditation, even the development of wisdom, all of these are strategies to shape, stabilize, purify, and ultimately transcend the habitual mind, not through force, but through seeing. Because when the mind truly sees clearly, it lets go on its own. There is no need to suppress, control, or escape. The mind, when purified of craving and delusion, returns to its natural state, peaceful, luminous, unentangled. Throughout the Pāli canon, the Buddha returns again and again to this central truth. In fact, every teaching from karma to meditation to dependent origination presupposes the primacy of the mind. With mind as the forerunner, mind as the chief, mind-made are all things. The phrase is not poetic metaphor. It is precise. It is literal. The life you experience is a product of your own mind. And this is not meant to induce blame. It is meant to inspire empowerment. Because if you made your world with the mind, you can also remake it. Right here, right now. So let us begin this journey, not by trying to control the world, but by gently turning inward to understand the mind. Let us ask, what is the mind? How does it function? What shapes it? How can it be trained? And most importantly, how can understanding the mind lead us out of suffering and into freedom? These are not academic questions. They are the most intimate, urgent, and transformative questions of our human life. In the following sections, we will explore the structure of the mind according to the Pāli teachings, the role of volition and karma, the nature of perception and reaction, and how mindfulness and meditation open the path toward liberation. But always remember this: every step begins and ends in the mind. To neglect the mind is to walk in the dark, but to understand it is to light the path of awakening. When the Buddha declared, Manopubbaṅgamā, mind precedes all phenomena, he wasn't offering a casual observation. He was unveiling the foundation upon which his entire teaching rests. In the Pāli language, mano means mind or mental faculty, Pubbaṅgamā means that which comes first, and Dhamma refers to all experiential phenomena. What this line teaches is radical. Everything that arises in our life, internally or externally perceived, is shaped and preceded by mind. Our joys, our sorrows, our beliefs, and our bondage, they do not fall upon us from the outside like random fate. They arise from within, from our own mind stream. Understanding this principle is the first turning of the wheel toward liberation. But to appreciate the depth of this teaching, we must examine what is meant by mind in the Pāli tradition. Unlike in English, where mind often refers vaguely to the intellect or thought processes, the Pāli canon reveals a far more intricate and layered view. The term mind in the early Buddhist teachings includes three primary concepts: citta, mano, and vaya. While these terms overlap, each holds a distinct function in the spiritual psychology of the Buddha. Citta refers to the heart-mind, the center of awareness and volition. It is the emotional and intentional core of our being. It is not merely the place where thoughts occur, but where craving arises, where anger flares, where compassion blossoms. Citta is deeply personal, fluid, and responsive to the quality of what we dwell on. This is the mind the Buddha urged us to cultivate and purify. Mano, by contrast, functions more like the mental processor, the cognitive faculty that manages sensory impressions, memory, and mental labeling. Mano operates when we categorize an object, recognize a pattern, or retrieve a name. It is the instrument that organizes mental content but does not determine our deeper reaction to it. Vaya, or consciousness, is even subtler. It refers to the bare awareness that arises in contact with a sense object. There are 6 kinds: eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, and mind consciousness. Vaya is not a soul or essence. It arises dependent on contact and ceases when contact ceases. So when the Buddha says, mind precedes all, he is not pointing to just thought or intellect. He is speaking of the entire inner architecture of human experience: awareness, processing, intention, and reaction. Every moment, this dynamic system conditions how we interpret reality and respond to it. From this, we see that mind is not one thing but a complex interplay. And it is in this interplay that karma is born. Let's consider a simple example. Imagine someone insults you. The sound of the words contacts your ear. That's sotavaya, ear consciousness. The mind recognizes the language. That's mano. Then a flash of hurt or rage arises. That's citta. That emotional reaction may spiral into a decision to strike back or withdraw, which becomes speech or action. In that one moment, the entire process is invisible to most of us, yet it is profoundly formative. Each time we react in the same way, the tendency deepens. This is the birth of habitual karma. And yet it all began, not with the words spoken, but with the way the mind processed them. The insult may have come from outside, but the suffering came from inside. This is why the Buddha places such tremendous emphasis on awareness. Without awareness, the mind reacts automatically, blindly following old grooves carved by craving and aversion. But with awareness, we begin to see the unfolding process clearly. We recognize the trigger, observe the arising thought or emotion, and choose a response rooted in wisdom instead of reactivity. This ability is not magical, it is trainable. It is the fruit of mindfulness and meditation. To say that mind precedes all things is not merely to state a fact. It is to accept responsibility. Not guilt, not shame, but a clear-eyed recognition that we are co-creators of our experience. This is the beginning of spiritual maturity. The immature mind blames. It points outward. He made me angry. This situation ruined my peace. But the mature mind turns inward. Anger arose in me. I lost my balance in that situation. This shift in language is not just semantic. It is the difference between victimhood and liberation. It is the difference between samsara and the path out of it. Moreover, understanding that mind comes first gives us a clear directive for practice. If we wish to change our life, we must change the mind. If we wish to purify our karma, we must purify the intentions that drive it. And if we wish to understand the nature of existence, we must come to know the mind directly, not through philosophy, but through observation. The Buddha did not speculate about the mind. He sat under the Bodhi tree and watched it. With deep stillness and unwavering clarity, he observed how thoughts arose and passed, how clinging created suffering, how insight dissolved illusion. That is the same path we are invited to walk. So let us no longer look for answers in the external world alone. Let us turn inward with courage and sincerity. Let us investigate this mind, not to judge or control it, but to understand it. For in understanding, there is freedom. The Dhammapada continues. If one speaks or acts with an impure mind, suffering follows, as the cartwheel follows the hoof of the ox. But if one speaks or acts with a pure mind, happiness follows, like a shadow that never leaves. The difference between these two lives, one of bondage, one of liberation, lies not in the world, but in the mind that meets the world. Thus, to say that the mind precedes all things is to say that the key to everything we seek, peace, joy, compassion, clarity, already lies within us. Not in a distant heaven, not in some external savior, but in the very moment of awareness we are having now. This is where the path begins. This is where transformation becomes possible. And this is where we must place our deepest attention. To walk the path of Dhamma is to train in seeing clearly. And in this endeavor, few things are more important than understanding the nature of the mind itself, not in abstract theory, but in direct experience. The Buddha's teachings in the Pāli canon offer a deeply nuanced and precise map of the mind, describing it not as a single thing, but as a layered process with different functions. Among the most important distinctions in the early texts are the terms citta, mano, and vaya. Though all three are commonly translated as mind or consciousness, each represents a different aspect of the mental continuum. Grasping these layers is essential for anyone seeking to understand how our inner world operates and how liberation becomes possible. Let us begin with vaya, often translated as consciousness. In the Buddha's analysis of dependent origination, vaya is one of the earliest links, arising in dependence on name and form and giving rise to sense experience. Vaya is that which knows, yet it is not a self, not a soul, not a permanent entity. It is always tied to a particular sense base. There is eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, and mind consciousness. Each arises when the respective sense organ comes into contact with an object, like eye plus visible form equals eye consciousness. This is an automatic and momentary awareness that something is there. It does not yet involve interpretation, meaning, or reaction. Vaya is like the flash of light when a camera shutter opens. It illuminates the presence of an object, but says nothing about what it means or how we feel about it. Next is mano, which can be understood as the coordinating and processing aspect of the mind. It is the inner sense faculty responsible for managing mental objects, concepts, memories, and thought formations. Mano is what organizes and labels our experiences. If vaya is the knowing of a sound, mano is what recognizes that the sound is a voice, and perhaps even recalls whose voice it is. It links the present moment with past memory and future projection. Mano is where language lives, where mental images and abstract ideas are assembled. This faculty is absolutely necessary for practical functioning in the world. It helps us make decisions, plan, recall information, and think analytically. Yet, it is also the seat of much confusion when untrained, because it can generate delusion just as easily as wisdom. An untrained Mano replays painful stories, clings to fixed identities, and continually projects meaning onto reality that isn't actually there. Finally, we come to citta, often referred to as the heart-mind. This is the most profound and central layer in the early Buddhist teachings. Citta is the field in which all other mental activities arise. It includes the emotional tone of the moment, our mood, our tendencies, our deeper attitudes. It is the seat of intention, will, and volition, while Vaya merely receives impressions. And Mano organizes them. It is citta that feels, reacts, and inclines. It is citta that generates craving or compassion, fear or wisdom. It is citta that grasps or releases. In many ways, citta is the moral center of our being, because it is here that karma begins. Cetanā bhikkhave kamma vadami, the Buddha said, "It is volition, monks, that I call karma." And that volition arises in the citta, the heart of the mind. To better understand these layers, imagine a drop of ink falling into a glass of water. Vaya is like the moment the drop touches the surface, it registers the impact. Mano is the movement of water that disperses the ink, forming patterns and shapes. Citta is the color of the water itself, the overall tone that results, and that either stays clear or becomes clouded, depending on what enters it. In this way, we can see how each part of the mind plays a role. One perceives, one interprets, one reacts. Together, they form the totality of our experience. This triadic understanding also helps explain how suffering and freedom arise. For example, if we see something unpleasant, say, a harsh facial expression, eye consciousness arises. Mano processes the impression, that person is angry. Citta may respond with fear, defensiveness, or irritation. That emotional tone then informs the next thought, the next word, the next action. The more often this cycle is repeated, the more it becomes an ingrained habit. But now imagine we bring mindfulness into this moment. We see the expression and notice the visual contact. We observe the labeling mind forming a judgment. We feel the tightening in the chest. But instead of reacting, we pause. We breathe. We choose not to follow the habitual reaction. In that pause, we have already interrupted the cycle of suffering. This is the beginning of liberation, and it begins not in the world, but in the structure of the mind itself. What's remarkable is that this entire inner process is happening thousands of times a day, often unnoticed. We are constantly reacting to impressions, shaping perceptions, generating thoughts, forming intentions, all beneath the surface of awareness. The Buddha taught that to understand suffering, we must understand this process. And to understand this process, we must come to know the mind, not abstractly, but intimately. That is why meditation is central in the path. It allows us to observe these mental layers in real time. We begin to see how a thought arises, how it links to an emotion, how the heart inclines toward craving or resistance, and how the story forms in the mind. And in seeing this, we gain choice. We are no longer pushed and pulled by unseen forces. We become free. Moreover, the Buddha emphasized that the mind is not fixed. Citta is malleable, trainable, transformable. Just as a field can be cleared of weeds and sown with nourishing seeds, so too can the mind be purified. The early texts use beautiful imagery to describe this. The mind can be developed, freed, luminous, and undefiled. These are not poetic ideals. They are descriptions of lived experience for those who practice. The mind, once obscured by defilements, can become clear like still water. And in that clarity, wisdom naturally arises. To summarize, Vaya is the spark of consciousness, Mano is the processing center, and Citta is the heart of volition and emotional tone. These three are not separate entities, but aspects of a single unfolding stream. To know them is to understand how experience arises. To train them is to walk the path. To purify them is to find the peace that the Buddha promised, a mind free from greed, hatred, and delusion, a mind that no longer spins the wheel of suffering. And so, as we continue this exploration, let us remember, we are not merely analyzing Buddhist terminology. We are learning to see ourselves clearly. For it is only by understanding the true nature of this mind that we can ever hope to liberate it. One of the most profound revelations in the Buddha's teaching is this: karma begins in the mind. Before a single word is spoken, before a hand is raised, before an act is carried out in the world, there is intention. That invisible mental impulse, subtle yet decisive, is where karma is truly born. It is not the action itself that carries moral weight, but the volition that precedes it. This is why the Buddha declared in the Anguttara Nikaya, Cetanā, Bhikkhave, Kamavadami monks, "It is volition that I call karma." That short line contains a world of ethical and spiritual insight. It means that our inner life matters immensely. Every thought, every urge, every inclination of the heart has the potential to shape our destiny, not in some superstitious way, but through the natural unfolding of cause and effect. To understand karma as mental first is to shift how we think about responsibility. We often judge actions by their outward effects, whether they helped or harmed, pleased or offended. But the Dhamma points deeper. Suppose you give a gift to someone, not out of generosity, but to gain praise or manipulate. The outward action may look noble, but the karmic seed you plant is one of greed or deceit. Alternatively, if someone, in the heat of self-defense, strikes another, but with no intention to harm, though the action appears violent, the karmic imprint is weaker, perhaps even neutral. It all depends on cetanā, the quality and motivation of the mind at the moment of action. This is a radically internal standard, one that requires deep honesty and self-awareness. For in the Dhamma, we cannot hide behind appearances. It is not what others see that matters. It is what we know in the stillness of our own heart. This is why cultivating awareness of intention is central to the path. Without it, we may act out of habit, social conditioning, or unconscious craving, never truly seeing the roots of our behavior. But when we begin to watch the mind, to observe the rising of desire, fear, anger, or compassion before action, we gain access to the true power of transformation. We can catch the seed before it becomes a tree. We can see the wheel of samsara beginning to turn and choose not to spin it. Let's take an everyday example. Someone criticizes you. Immediately, the mind reacts. There may be a flash of defensiveness, a sharp retort forming on the tongue. But pause for a moment. What's actually happening? First, there is the contact of sound and ear. Sotavaya arises. Next, Mano interprets, "They are blaming me." Then Citta responds with irritation or hurt. That feeling quickly feeds into an intention. To protect, to retaliate, to withdraw. And that, the moment of intention, is where karma is seated. If you lash out, that intention solidifies into speech and action, deepening the habit. But if you recognize the impulse, breathe, and choose not to act on it, or respond with kindness instead, the karmic flow is interrupted. The pattern is weakened. Freedom grows. In this way, we see that karma is not fate, not punishment, and not merely about deeds. Karma is a dynamic process of mind shaping mind. Every intention is like a drop of dye falling into the stream of consciousness, coloring it in subtle ways. Greedy thoughts do not simply pass. They condition the mind to grasp more. Angry thoughts reinforce the path of aversion. And conversely, thoughts of patience, generosity, or compassion strengthen wholesome inclinations. Over time, these intentions form the contours of our character. This is how the future is shaped, not by some divine judge, but by the ongoing habits of our own mind. And here lies both the danger and the promise of karma. If we do not understand the mental roots of action, we may live reactively, endlessly creating conditions for more suffering. But if we learn to see the process clearly, we can take back our power. We become the authors of our own inner evolution. In the Majjhima Nikaya, the Buddha describes two monks who experience the same pain, but only one suffers. Why? Because one allows the mind to dwell in aversion, while the other watches the pain without identification. The external condition is the same. The karmic result is not. This illustrates the subtle, yet immense, power of intention. In Buddhist ethics, this internal orientation makes morality a living, breathing practice, not a list of commandments, but a mirror held up to the mind. When practicing the 5 precepts, for example, abstaining from killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, false speech, and intoxication, the goal is not blind obedience, but cultivation of pure intention. We refrain not just from the act, but from the mindset that would lead to it. Thus, the precepts become not limitations, but liberations from greed, hatred, and delusion at the root level. This is also why meditation is indispensable. On the cushion, we begin to see how volitions arise, even in silence. A judgmental thought appears, we observe it. A desire to fidget emerges, we note it. A kind wish for someone surfaces, we recognize it. In every moment, we are seeing karma being born in real time. The mind becomes our laboratory, and our ethical training deepens not through theory, but through direct observation. And so, we begin to understand, karma is not only what we do, it is what we are becoming, moment by moment. Every mental movement sets a direction. Like a compass needle, it inclines the heart towards certain possibilities and away from others. The Buddha spoke of this with a beautiful metaphor: whatever one frequently thinks and ponders upon, that will become the inclination of the mind. We are, in a very real sense, becoming our thoughts, not in the fleeting surface sense, but in the deep grooves they carve into the fabric of our consciousness. But here's the most important point. Since karma is mental, karma is also transformable. No one is condemned. No one is beyond change. A mind filled with hatred today can be trained into compassion. A mind trapped in ignorance can wake up. The story of Angulimala, the feared murderer who became a gentle monk, is perhaps the most dramatic example. But in subtler ways, this transformation is possible for all of us. Every time we catch a harmful impulse and choose not to act on it, every time we return to mindfulness instead of craving, we are turning the tide of karma. We are reclaiming our freedom from the inside out. Thus, to understand that karma is mental first is to enter a new paradigm of spiritual responsibility. It asks us to turn our attention inward, not to judge or suppress, but to observe with clarity. It calls us to take the reins of our inner life and recognize that the mind is not just the root of suffering, but also the seedbed of awakening. What we nourish, moment by moment, becomes who we are. And what we are becoming is, ultimately, in our hands. One of the most startling and liberating insights of the Buddha is that the world we live in, the world we think is out there, is, to a great extent, a construction of our own conditioned mind. This is not to deny the reality of external phenomena, but to point to the deeper truth that how we experience the world is inseparable from the state of our mind. What we call reality is not a passive reflection of the outer environment. It is an interpretation. It is a projection. It is a deeply conditioned process shaped by past experiences, mental formations, and emotional tendencies. In essence, we don't just live in the world, we live in our version of the world. And that version is crafted, moment by moment, by the mind itself. To understand this, we must explore the role of perception, mental formations, and craving, and how these processes distort what we see and feel. In the Abhidhamma and across the suttas, the Buddha describes the mind not as a clear window, but as a lens colored by its own biases, memories, and habits. For example, two people may witness the same event, say, someone speaking loudly in a room. One may perceive it as aggressive and rude, and feel anger. Another may perceive it as enthusiasm and feel joy. The sound is the same. The outer event is identical. What differs is the mind's interpretation of it. That interpretation arises from internal conditioning. This is what the Buddha meant when he said in the Sayutta Nikaya, with name and form as condition, consciousness arises. With consciousness as condition, name and form arises. This mutual dependence is the foundation of subjective experience. Name refers to the mental side, feeling, perception, intention, contact, and attention. Form refers to the physical elements and the body. Together, they form the personal world of experience, shaped not just by what is, but by how the mind categorizes, reacts, and constructs meaning. This understanding is critical for two reasons. First, it shows us why suffering persists. We suffer not because life is inherently painful, but because we interpret impermanence as loss, uncertainty as threat, and discomfort as injustice. We overlay our experience with craving, resistance, and projection. This is the core mechanism of dukkha. When the mind clings to what it finds pleasant, resists what it finds unpleasant, and ignores what it finds neutral, it spins a constant cycle of dissatisfaction, even in the midst of favorable conditions. As long as we do not see this clearly, we try to solve suffering by changing external circumstances, unaware that the real solution lies within. Second, it reveals the path to freedom. If our world is constructed by mind, then we can reconstruct it, not by escaping to a different place, but by transforming the mind that experiences. This is the essence of citta bhavana, the cultivation of the heart-mind. By training perception through mindfulness and wisdom, we begin to see through our projections and relate to experience as it actually is, impermanent, unsatisfactory when clung to, and empty of a fixed self. Consider the practice of vipassana, or insight meditation. In this practice, we train ourselves to observe the flow of experience without identifying with it. A thought arises, we note it and let it go. A sensation appears, we observe it without calling it mine. Over time, this simple act of observing dismantles the illusion that we are the content of our experience. We begin to see that everything is conditioned. This irritation came because of this memory, which was triggered by that sound, which reminded me of a past hurt, which I never truly examined. And now it's coloring the present moment. In seeing this chain, we loosen its grip. The narrative loses its force. The world softens. This understanding also radically transforms how we relate to others. If we realize that our perception of someone is not the whole truth but a mental construction, we begin to hold our judgments more lightly. We no longer take our emotions or stories as final. We become more compassionate, more patient, more open to seeing freshly. In the Majjhima Nikaya, the Buddha reminds us, in what is seen, there is only the seen, in what is heard, only the heard, in what is sensed, only the sensed. This points us toward direct experience, stripped of narrative. That is where peace begins. Modern neuroscience has also begun to echo this ancient insight. Cognitive science tells us that the brain is not a camera passively recording the world. It is an active filter, constantly selecting, interpreting, and predicting based on past data. The mind literally fills in gaps in perception, constructs meaning, and even fabricates elements of memory. The Buddha saw this over 2,500 years ago, not with machines, but with the quiet clarity of direct introspection. His teachings guide us to observe this mental construction in real time and gradually disidentify from it. The mind creates its world. But this does not mean we live in illusion in the sense of hallucination. It means our suffering is not located in the external. It means the freedom we seek is not out there. It is right here, in how we perceive, interpret, and respond to each moment. This is why mindfulness is so powerful. It doesn't change the world. It changes how we meet the world. And that changes everything. The conditioned mind is like a mirror covered in dust. Each experience, each habit, each belief adds another layer. We come to mistake the dust for the mirror itself. But as we begin to watch the mind, not from judgment, but from awareness, we start wiping away the layers. Little by little, the original clarity of the mind begins to shine. The Buddha called this the Pabhasara Siddha, the radiant mind. Not radiant because of what it contains, but because of what it is when freed from distortion. In this light, spiritual practice is not about adding something new. It is about removing what obscures. We are not building a new self. We are unlearning the conditioned habits that have kept us bound to suffering. And as those habits fall away, the world begins to look different, not because the world has changed, but because the seer has changed. So we return to the great truth. The mind creates the world we live in. Not the world of shared physics and geography, but the world of meaning, reaction, and feeling, the world in which we either suffer or awaken. This is why the Dhamma always turns the gaze inward. The battlefield is not out there. The source of bondage and freedom lies within. When we understand this, not as a concept, but as a living insight, we step into the heart of the Buddha's path. And from that heart, clarity and compassion can flow into every corner of our life. If the mind is the forerunner of all experience, if it colors, constructs, and reacts to the world, then the most essential skill we can develop is the ability to observe the mind as it functions. This is the role of sati, or mindfulness. Mindfulness is the key that unlocks the door to inner freedom. Without it, we remain lost in automatic reactions, unconscious habits, and deeply conditioned responses. With it, we begin to wake up. In the Pāli canon, sati is not described as a passive or vague awareness. It is a precise, sharp, and stabilizing mental factor that remembers to stay present. The root of the word sati comes from the verb sarati, which means to remember. But what is it that we are meant to remember? Not the past, but the present. Sati is the capacity to remember what is happening right now, to hold attention steady in the unfolding moment, and not to be swept away by craving, aversion, or delusion. It is not mere attention. It is attention imbued with wisdom. The Buddha placed mindfulness at the very center of his teaching. In the Satipatthana Sutta, he laid out the four foundations of mindfulness: mindfulness of the body, of feelings, of mind, and of mental phenomena. These four domains are not separate practices, but interwoven ways of understanding how experience unfolds. Together, They form a complete map for observing the mind and body process as it really is. To practice mindfulness is to begin noticing what is happening in each moment, without clinging to it, judging it, or identifying with it. When a thought arises, we note thinking. When an emotion appears, we note anger, or fear, or joy, depending on its tone. When the body moves, we know it is moving. When the breath flows in and out, we feel it directly. This may sound simple, but it is profoundly transformative. For in ordinary life, we are rarely aware of what is happening. The mind rushes ahead, spins stories, resists what it dislikes, chases what it craves. We are caught not in reality, but in our projections. Mindfulness interrupts this momentum. It brings us home to what is truly here. And it does more than just reveal, it changes the mind. Through mindful awareness, we begin to see the moment of craving before it turns into grasping. We see the first flicker of irritation before it hardens into speech. We catch the arising of a judgment before it becomes suffering. This gap, the space between stimulus and response, is the birthplace of freedom. Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, once said, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. And that space is our power to choose. In our choice lies our growth and our freedom." Mindfulness expands that space. What's more, mindfulness helps us see the impersonality of the mind. Thoughts and emotions arise not because we choose them, but because of conditions. A sound triggers a memory, which triggers an emotion, which triggers a thought. If we watch carefully, we begin to see that there is no central self controlling this process, just a chain of cause and effect. And yet, with awareness, we are no longer enslaved by it. We are not removing thoughts or feelings. We are changing our relationship to them. We move from identification to observation. From "I am angry" to "anger is present." This shift is subtle but profound. It undermines the illusion of self, and it brings tremendous peace. The Buddha likened mindfulness to a gatekeeper at the entrance of a city. Just as the gatekeeper watches who comes in and who goes out, mindfulness watches what enters the mind. It sees the arising of wholesome and unwholesome states. It alerts us when craving is creeping in or when delusion is distorting perception. Without a gatekeeper, the city is overrun. Without mindfulness, the mind is overwhelmed by habit. But with mindfulness, there is protection, clarity, and stability. Scientific research has begun to echo these truths. Modern studies show that mindfulness practices literally rewire the brain, increasing gray matter in areas associated with emotional regulation, attention, and compassion. It reduces reactivity, lowers stress hormones, and even slows the aging process. But beyond these benefits, what matters most is the inner liberation that mindfulness makes possible. Because only through mindfulness can we begin to dismantle the ignorance at the root of suffering. Only through mindfulness can we see that every moment is impermanent, unsatisfactory when clung to, and empty of inherent self. This is not philosophical, it is experiential. The Dhamma is not something to believe, but something to see. And mindfulness is the seeing. Importantly, mindfulness is not a cold or detached state. In its fullest expression, it is warm, curious, and infused with compassion. The Buddha often taught that mindfulness should be accompanied by sampajana, clear comprehension or wisdom. It is not enough to know what is happening. We must also understand how it functions and what it leads to. When anger arises, we do not merely note anger, we begin to see its roots and consequences. We ask, does this lead to harm or to peace? Is this rooted in delusion or in clarity? In this way, mindfulness becomes the foundation for ethical living, for wise speech, for skillful choices. It also gives us stability. In meditation, we train the mind to stay, to rest on the breath, the body, the sensations, whatever anchor is chosen. The mind, which is normally scattered and restless, gradually becomes unified. This unification is called samadhi, and it is born from sustained mindfulness. As mindfulness deepens, so does stillness. As stillness deepens, insight arises. And from insight, wisdom. This is the natural unfolding of the path, from attention to stability to understanding to freedom. So we return to the theme of this lecture. The mind is the root. But if we want to transform the root, we must first see it clearly. Mindfulness is that seeing. Without it, we are trapped in the storm. With it, we stand in the eye of the storm. The winds may still blow, but we are no longer swept away. In this way, mindfulness is not a technique. It is a way of being. a way of relating to experience with care, clarity, and non-clinging. It turns every moment into an opportunity for awakening. And the more we live mindfully, the more the mind becomes a friend instead of a stranger, a companion instead of a saboteur. Let us, then, train this quality with diligence. Let us remember that liberation does not come from force or suppression, but from deep seeing. As the Buddha said, when mindfulness is established and sustained, the mind becomes steady, clear, and contented. And from this mind, wisdom arises like a flame from a lamp. This is the power of mindfulness, not to escape life, but to meet it fully, with the wisdom that liberates. If the mind is the forerunner of all actions, and if our suffering or peace depends on the quality of the mind that meets each moment, then the natural question arises, how do we train it? How do we not just observe the mind, but actively cultivate the right kind of mind, the kind that leads toward awakening rather than entanglement? The Buddha's answer lies in systematic training, which he called bhavana, literally bringing into being or development. It is often translated as mental cultivation or meditation, but it encompasses far more than sitting silently on a cushion. Bhavana is the deliberate shaping of the heart-mind through ethical living, deep concentration, wise reflection, and constant mindfulness. It is a path of purification, not in a moralistic sense, but in the sense of clearing the mind of defilements such as greed, hatred, and delusion, so that its natural luminosity may shine forth. The Buddha laid out a framework for this cultivation in the Noble Eightfold Path, and central to that path are three mental factors: right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. These three work together to form the mental discipline aspect of the path. But before any of them can bear fruit, we must first understand that the mind is not fixed. It is trainable, and every thought we allow, every emotion we entertain, every intention we follow, is an act of cultivation. The question is not if we are cultivating something, it is what we are cultivating. The Buddha spoke often about two types of mind, the unwholesome and the wholesome. The unwholesome mind is rooted in greed, hatred, and delusion. It grasps, resists, clings to views, and reacts blindly. It creates suffering not only for others, but for the one who carries it. The wholesome mind, on the other hand, is rooted in generosity, compassion, and wisdom. It lets go, it understands, it responds with clarity and peace. These two streams of mind are always available, and in every moment, we incline toward one or the other. So how do we actively cultivate the wholesome? First, through right effort, which the Buddha described as the energy to prevent unwholesome states from arising. Abandon unwholesome states that have already arisen. Cultivate wholesome states that have not yet arisen. And maintain and develop wholesome states already present. This fourfold effort is the gardener's path. It's not about suppression or force, it's about skillful tending. When anger arises, we do not attack ourselves. We recognize it, understand its causes, and choose not to feed it. When generosity arises, we nourish it, allowing it to expand and stabilize. This is mental cultivation in action, moment by moment, gently turning the mind toward health and wisdom. Second, we must pay attention to the company we keep, not only external companions, but also the thoughts and mental states we associate with. The Buddha often compared unwholesome mental states to bad friends, and wholesome qualities to noble companions. He encouraged frequent reflection on the qualities we want to grow. Just as a seed requires the right soil and sunlight, the mind requires the right environment, books, conversations, teachings, and especially silence and solitude, which allow deep reflection. Third, we must cultivate right view, seeing things as they truly are. This does not mean adopting a belief, but developing direct insight into impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and non-self. These three characteristics, when seen clearly, weaken clinging at the root. When we see that everything changes, we stop trying to control it. When we see that clinging leads to pain, we begin to let go. When we see that there is no fixed me in charge, we become more spacious and compassionate. Right view clears the fog through which the mind misperceives reality. Fourth, we must practice right concentration. A scattered, distracted mind is like a flickering candle in the wind. It cannot see clearly or rest deeply. But when the mind is gathered and still, through practices like breath meditation or jhana, it becomes luminous and strong. This inner stability is not the goal, but the foundation. With it, we can investigate phenomena calmly, without being tossed by each wave of emotion. Concentration supports insight, and insight frees the heart. Fifth, we must nurture the divine abode's loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. These are not sentimental states, but powerful, expansive qualities that purify the heart. When we cultivate loving kindness, we train the mind to respond to others with care rather than fear or judgment. When we cultivate equanimity, we develop the strength to meet gain and loss, praise and blame, with balance. These qualities directly oppose the kilesas and transform the way we relate to the world. It's important to recognize that cultivating the mind is not about becoming someone else. It is about becoming more deeply and clearly yourself, free from distortion, fear, and confusion. The right mind is not a superhuman mind. It is a human mind returned to its natural state, aware, kind, balanced, and wise. This cultivation does not happen overnight. The Buddha likened the path to taming a wild elephant. At first, the mind resists, kicks, and pulls. But with patience, kindness, and steady effort, it becomes calm and responsive. We learn to sit with discomfort without flinching. We learn to see through delusion without bitterness. We learn to smile at our own habits, not because they are trivial, but because we no longer believe they define us. And finally, we must remember that we are not alone. The Sangha, the community of practitioners, both monastic and lay, is part of this cultivation. Spiritual friendship supports and strengthens us. The Buddha said that good friendship is not half of the holy life, but the whole of it. Others remind us of what is possible. Their presence reflects our own potential. In the end, cultivating the right mind is not a task, but a way of living. It is a commitment to meet life with awareness rather than autopilot, with kindness rather than fear, with inquiry rather than assumption. Every moment is an opportunity to cultivate. Every breath is a chance to begin again. As the Dhammapada says, the mind is hard to control, swift and nimble. It flits wherever it wills. To tame the mind is great bliss. A tamed mind brings happiness. So let us train the mind, not to force it into perfection, but to return it to its natural clarity. Let us cultivate not just attention, but intention. Not just calm, but wisdom. Not just stillness, but freedom. This is the right mind. This is the root of liberation. If there is one truth that pulses through every teaching of the Buddha, it is this: the mind matters. More than wealth or fame, more than health or fortune, more than the external world we strive to arrange and control, it is the state of our own mind that determines the quality of our life. The root of suffering and the root of liberation both lie here. Not outside, not in others, not in fate. Here, in the flickering thoughts, the rising emotions, the quiet intentions that shape each day. Here, in the deepest seat of consciousness, where choices are made, often before we even notice them. This is the heart of the Dhamma. And this is why the Buddha pointed not to the heavens, not to gods, not to destiny, but to citta, this very mind, as the field of transformation. To say that the mind is the root is not a metaphor. It is a direct pointing to how reality functions. From the mind arise thoughts, words, and actions. From actions arise habits. From habits arise character. And from character, a life unfolds. The world we experience is not just happening to us. It is being co-created by us, from the inside out. We respond not to things as they are, but to things as the mind perceives them. And that perception is conditioned by the seeds we've planted, by the inclinations, memories, and reactions that we've rehearsed over lifetimes. But here is the liberating truth. Just as the mind has been conditioned, it can be reconditioned. Just as it has been shaped by ignorance, it can be shaped by wisdom. Just as it has produced suffering, it can produce peace. This is the revolution of the Buddha's path, not in the world, but in the one who sees the world. To walk this path is not to chase after some distant goal. It is to begin where we are. With this breath, this moment, this mind. Whether agitated or calm, whether clear or confused, this mind is the ground we stand on. There is no need to wait for a better one. There is no need to become someone else. The path begins not with fixing what is broken, but with seeing clearly what is here, without clinging, without resistance. Mindfulness reveals. Insight liberates. Compassion heals. These are not doctrines to believe. They are tools to use. And every day, in every situation, we are planting seeds. In every response, whether angry or patient, grasping or generous, we are cultivating the future. The question is not whether we are sowing seeds, but what kind of seeds we are sowing. The Dhamma does not ask us to be perfect. It asks us to be awake, to see the mind as it is, and to train it gently, steadily, toward clarity and kindness. There will be days when we fall into old habits, when the mind flares with irritation, when judgment or fear take hold. But even then, we can practice. We can stop. We can breathe. We can notice. And in that moment of noticing, something shifts. Awareness is already a form of freedom. The more we return to that awareness, the more natural it becomes. Slowly, the mind begins to incline not toward reactivity, but toward reflection. Not toward clinging, but toward letting go. Not toward delusion, but toward wisdom. And this shift changes everything. It changes how we hear words. It changes how we speak them. It changes how we meet pain, how we celebrate joy, how we respond to loss. A trained mind sees impermanence and doesn't panic. It sees craving and doesn't obey. It sees suffering and doesn't blame. This kind of mind is not easily shaken. It is not dependent on outer conditions. It is rooted in something deeper than pleasure or pain. It is rooted in understanding. This is the mind that the Buddha called liberated, not because it has escaped the world, but because it is no longer imprisoned by it. The Buddha was not a god, not a prophet, not a savior. He was a man who trained his mind to the point of full awakening. He saw with absolute clarity that the mind, when untrained, is the cause of suffering, and when trained, is the cause of peace. He saw that liberation is possible not through someone else's blessing, but through one's own effort, guided by wisdom. And this liberation is not reserved for monks and forests. It is available to all who are willing to look inward with honesty and patience. The mind is the same, whether it belongs to a prince or a pauper, a layperson or a nun. Its laws are universal, and its potential is immense. So let us remember, the mind is not an enemy. It is not something to be conquered or silenced. It is something to be understood, befriended, and cultivated. Like a field, it will grow whatever we plant in it: fear or faith, resentment or forgiveness, delusion or insight. If we plant mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom, the harvest will be freedom. Not just in meditation halls, but in daily life, in how we work, speak, eat, and relate to others. This is the true miracle of the Dhamma. It transforms ordinary life into a path of awakening. There is a verse in the Dhammapada that says, "All that we are is the result of what we have thought." The mind is everything. What we think, we become. These are not mere words. They're an invitation. An invitation to stop blaming the world, to stop running from ourselves, and to begin tending to the root. Not tomorrow. Not when conditions are perfect. But now. Even the smallest effort to observe the mind is a step toward freedom. Even the briefest moment of mindfulness plants a seed. And those seeds, watered with care, will bear fruit, not just for ourselves, but for all beings around us. For when the mind is right, the world is right. And in that clarity, we begin to see, not as a theory, but as a lived truth, that awakening is not somewhere far away. It begins exactly where we are, with this mind, right now. So plant the seeds. Tend the garden. Trust the process. And let the Dhamma grow, not as belief, but as transformation. For truly, the mind is the root, and when we train it well, everything else follows.